We've all heard the phrase, beauty is pain, which actually comes from the old French saying, Il faut souffrir pour être belle. You must suffer to be beautiful. But just how painful can beauty be, and how far is one willing to go in the name of it? Let's find out. Welcome to our series, Beauty is Pain, where we delve into fashion and beauty horror stories from history, examining the extreme lengths people would go to in the name of beauty and fashion. In the world of beauty and fashion, where individuals often push the boundaries in pursuit of aesthetic perfection, history unfolds stories of tragedies that highlight the extreme lengths some have gone to. One such story is that of Isadora Duncan, a woman whose passion for dance ultimately led to her demise in a tragic and ironic twist. Born on May 27, 1877 in San Francisco, California, Isadora Duncan emerged as a pioneering figure in the world of dance in the early 20th century. Unfortunately, Isadora experienced numerous tragedies throughout her life, starting with the divorce of her parents at an early age and her family being thrust into poverty as a result of the separation. But in the midst of these challenges, Duncan found solace in movement and dance, an art form that would shape her destiny. Isadora's introduction to dance came at an early age when she began teaching herself classical ballet. At that time, in the 1800s, ballet was very strict and rigid and structured in a very formal form of dance. Characterized by tight corsets, fluffy tutus, and point shoes, it demanded precise technique and adherence to tradition. This is not something that Isadora was a fan of. After a few dance lessons at ballet school, Isadora would quickly tire of its restrictions, declaring it a school of affected grace and toe walking. She would then quit and go on to focus on developing her own art form and dance. Duncan's vision was a departure from the structured formality of ballet, emphasizing freedom of expression through movement. She sought inspiration from nature, emotions, and the human spirit. Her revolutionary approach marked the birth of what would later become known as modern dance, which she is said to be the inventor of. As Isadora matured, so did her passion for dance, and in 1899 she actually moved to Europe, where she garnered and attracted so much attention for her unconventional dance. Duncan's dances were inspired by ancient Greek art, and in contrast to traditional ballet, she often danced barefoot, wearing flowing Grecian-style tunics. Duncan's debut performance took place in Hungary in 1902. It turned out to be a complete success and sensation and was actually sold out for 30 days straight. Shows across Europe followed with a mixture of success and opposition to her new controversial approach to dance. Isadora quickly rose to fame, and her influence transcended borders. She toured extensively, captivating audiences across both the United States and Europe. She would even go on to establish her very own dance schools in various countries, which attracted aspiring dancers eager to embrace her revolutionary approach. And though she was primarily known for her dance styles and for being a dancer, Isadora was actually a fashion icon and trendsetter during her time, but not just on stage, in all aspects of her life. Isadora was the spokesperson for the dance of the future, and she believed that a revolution in dance would also require a revolution in dress. Fast forward to roughly 1909, Isadora would cross paths with the renowned Parisian fashion designer Paul Poiret. Paul was a revolutionary figure and designer in his very own right, and at the time was championing an unprecedented garment, shapeless dresses liberated from a constricting waistline. His designs aimed to free women from the unnatural confines of corsets and other undergarments, paving a way for a more liberating silhouette. The silhouette that would just so happen to become the one that defined the 1920s a decade later. When you read about Isadora's life, it literally sounds like a movie. From dancing for glamorous crowds on stages across the world, to experiencing living life in places like New York, London, and France, to even being the muse for artists and sculptors. Her life was one that you could really expect to watch or read about. But unfortunately, even the most glamorous lives are not shielded from tragedy, including Isadora, whose life was marked by numerous tragedies that left her forever shaken. In 1898, Duncan's father, Joseph, his wife, and their young daughter were among the 107 who drowned in the sinking of the steamship SS Mohegan off of England's Cornwall coast. Years later, on April 19 of 1913, Isadora's daughter Deirdre and son Patrick were in the car with their British governess Annie Sims when their car stalled. They were accompanied by a chauffeur at the time who got out to restart the engine. The chauffeur succeeded in restarting the engine, but the vehicle kicked into gear so abruptly that it ran off the road and plunged into the River Seine before the chauffeur could even get into the car. 7-year-old Deirdre, 3-year-old Patrick, and Annie Sims, their governess, all would drown. Isadora would go on to bear another child on August 13th of 1914, but unfortunately, shortly after his birth, he too would pass away. These horrific tragedies and losses would, as you can imagine, forever shake Isadora. Later, she would write in her autobiography, "If this sorrow had come to me much earlier in life, I might have overcome it. If much later, it would not have been so terrible. But at that moment, in the full power and energy of life, it completely shattered my force and power." Throughout her life, Isadora would also get into multiple car accidents of her own, and I can only imagine the trauma and the fear she must have experienced during those moments after losing her own children in a car accident. Though she would eventually return to her passion for dance, Isadora would just never fully recover, especially since tragedy just seemed to continue to follow her around. In her late 40s, Isadora struggled immensely emotionally, finding herself on the verge of suicide many times. Eventually, she would return to France, where she would live out the rest of her days. On the fateful day of September 14th, 1927, Isadora Duncan's life took a tragic turn in the most unexpected manner. Isadora, in the company of a friend, embarked on a spontaneous drive along the Promenade des Anglais in a sleek new convertible. According to historical documents, she had just purchased this convertible and was learning how to drive it with the help of a French chauffeur. When I read about this, I could only imagine how beautiful of a scene it was as they drove along the street in France, nonetheless, with the breeze flowing through their hair, their fingers, and across their face. Isadora's signature scarf being carried by the wind, drifting behind her. And for Isadora, during a time of grief and sadness, I can only imagine this moment to have been such a beautiful one and a refreshing escape from the pain that she was feeling. But unfortunately, unbeknownst to her, the flowing silk scarf that she wore as a symbol of her artistic expression would become an instrument of her demise. As the wind carried the scarf and it drifted behind her as they drove along the road, the scarf suddenly got caught in the wheels of the convertible. And as the car continued to move and the wheels continued to turn, it tightened and tightened around her neck. Within seconds, the silk transformed from a flowing, beautiful accessory to a cruel, unforgiving noose. At 9:40 p.m. that night, in a horrifying twist of fate, Isadora Duncan, the epitome of liberation through dance and fashion, was constricted and strangled by her own scarf. A tragic and ironic end to a life dedicated to the pursuit of beauty and artistic freedom. During her life and after her life, and even still to this day, Isadora continues to be a source of inspiration for artists and dancers and even film producers. Art has been created, sculptures have been made, and films have been produced as a result of Isadora's life and influence on the art world. So that's it for today's story. Let me know if you've heard it before. Let me know if you've seen any of the films made about Isadora's life, or if you've seen any of the artwork, which I'm sure you have, that was made and has been made based off of Isadora's life. I know that I heard of this story many years ago, but I had never really delved into the details, so it was very fascinating learning about Isadora's whole life. It was inspiring, it was entertaining, and it was tragic all at the same time. I think it's a really amazing thing when you're able to appreciate the moments and the hard times and the good times that made up a person's life, especially one who lived so long ago. So let me know if you enjoyed it, and we will see you next time for our next fashion, beauty, horror story.